In the previous video, I looked at a classic attacking game played by David Bronstein in the 1955 Interzonal tournament. And I want to take you through another game from the same tournament. And Bronstein is playing white again against another of his Soviet rivals, Yefim Geller. So, Bronstein with white, and he's placed bishop b5 against Geller. Well, in those days, a slightly unusual move. Nowadays, absolutely cutting edge play. g6 from Geller. Very reasonable move, one of the main lines. And here, well, if you recall the game between Caruana and Carlsen, played recently in the Norway chess tournament, that game went castles and then c3. Whoops, that meant to be c3, not knight c3. And Carlsen risked e5, and then there was this very interesting pawn sacrifice. The main move is knight f6 in that position. And then rook e1 is normal. d4 is an interesting sacrifice. That's for another day. I had some great fun playing that pawn sack. But instead of castles here, Bronstein played c3 straight away. Now that's a very tricky little move. Here, best move, well, there are a couple of decent moves. Knight f6 is reasonable for black, with the idea of just putting knight to d5 like that. And the other is to play d5 here, with a pawn sacrifice in mind. Queen a4, and now black's best is to give up a pawn like this. And just to play with the two bishops. A reasonable compensation, you could say, for black. The point is that black needs to defend against this threat, in inverted commas, a positional threat, to play the pawn into the middle of the board. Now Geller instead plays bishop g7, allowing d4, and here is where the game gets very sharp. In fact, black can take a pawn here. It's kind of a well-known opening trap, actually. Geller played queen b6 here, but if black wants to take a pawn, you can play queen b6 here. But white just gets wonderful compensation after knight d5. Obviously, if queen takes bishop, then knight c7 check. And this is a well-known position, actually. Bishop f4 is extremely embarrassing for black because of the threat to play knight c7 or bishop c7. Anyway, that's another story, but it shows how trappy this line is. Geller played queen b6, attacking the bishop. a4. We'll see that turns out to be a very clever idea. Geller took the pawn on d4. Now you don't want to give up the bishops, not straight away anyway. Bronstein simply castled. Now if black takes that pawn, you can see that once again white has excellent development just for one pawn. It's a bit like a kind of Moro gambit where black has played the queen out to b6 at a very early stage. Doesn't look very good. So Geller played a6. Bronstein took. The problem with a6 is that, well, I think it's a decent move under the circumstances, but it wastes more time. You know, black isn't developing the king side yet. I think the best is probably just to play pawn takes. But Geller played queen takes with the intention after this of taking the pawn on e4. Now that is incredibly risky. White has already brought the king to safety. Black's king is still in the middle. Rook e1. Good move. And the point is that if black plays the normal move knight f6, then rook e5 is actually going to trap that queen. Watch what happens. h3, and it's gone. So let's go back. So black can't play the straightforward knight f6. Instead, Geller played d5, which certainly looks reasonable, stopping that pawn advancing, claiming some important squares, and then maybe knight f6. So how would you try to generate some play here with white? I think Bronstein's next move is really interesting. Perhaps rather unexpected, but I think shows the kind of imagination that he has. A5. What's that about? That's a bit left field. Well, here's the point, that if knight f6, rook e5, the queen has found a square, but now knight a4. That's the point of advancing this a pawn, and the knight can come into one of these squares. If queen b5, knight b6, now bishop f4, you can see that this is quite a potent initiative. So back we go. a5 just played, bishop d7 from Geller, covering some squares. Queen b3 attacks 2 pawns. Here, maybe the best is bishop c6, but even so, knight a4 gives white quite a nice initiative, even in this endgame. After this, and rook a3 to attack the pawn on b7. That's not simple for black to defend against. Of course, even if the knight comes out, then there's potentially a knight e5 coming. So queen b3 just played, knight f6, rook e5. Now, in playing knight f6, I can understand why Geller was desperate to play this, but he has overlooked a tactic. Queen d3 played, and here there is a crunch move. Rook takes pawn check. Well, really, there's no way out now. Moving the king away is not going to help. King takes played, and now knight d5 with a scuppered attack on the queen. Knight d5 check, of course. Knight takes knight. Queen takes. So white has a queen and a pawn against a rook and a bishop. But black does at least have a nice blockade on d5. So next stage, how should white try to break down this kind of light square blockade? What would be your thoughts here? I mean, one way to go is to try to bring that knight into the game by playing g4 and g5. So once that f6 pawn has been exchanged off, then the knight has access here. But I can understand why Bronstein didn't want to do that, because it does weaken the king a little bit. But he did want to bring that knight into the game, because at the moment it's not going anywhere. He played knight e1. It's an excellent move. So redeploying via d3, and the knight may end up on c5. It might simply exchange off that knight on d5. But there's no need to commit yet. First of all, let's just see what's going on the c file. Rook c1. And in fact, if rook d8, then knight c5, and you can see the tactics start already, and that's winning. So this is already, well, we know it's lost, but black is really tipping over the edge now. And Geller played bishop f8. But after white's next move, he resigned. Bronstein played rook takes bishop, and that's game over. If rook takes, well, we can either take the knight or we can take on b7 check and pick something up. Or if pawn takes, again, queen b7 check and picks up the rook on a8. Well, a short game, but with some sparkle. I thought actually the star moves here were a5. I think that's a great idea. And then, well, obviously to spot the tactic with rook takes pawn check is very nice. But again, I liked Bronstein's technique here. Knight e1 is a cool move. Not taking any chances, but basically black is going to crack after that, after the knight swings round. Hope you enjoyed that. If you have a favourite game played by David Bronstein, do let me know. Write it in the comments. I'd be very interested to hear, and maybe I'll have a chance to cover that on the channel. Thanks for watching.